The silence in the podcast studio was so dense that you could feel the tension pulsing in the air like an accelerated heartbeat before a surgery that would change everything forever. Draymond Green was there, sitting in that leather chair that creaked softly with every restless movement, his enormous hands closing and opening into nervous fists, as if he were preparing for a battle he knew he could no longer avoid. It was a Thursday afternoon in Oakland that had begun like any other, but was destined to become the day when one of basketball's best-kept secrets would finally be revealed. The air conditioning murmured quietly in the background, creating an almost hypnotic soundtrack that contrasted violently with the electric energy that filled every inch of that small, improvised studio. "You know," Draymond began, his voice carrying a texture that few people had ever heard from the normally explosive Warriors player, "there are things you keep inside yourself for so long that they begin to weigh like stones in your chest. Secrets you promised to keep, but that consume you from within because you know the world needs to understand the truth." Robert Kim, the veteran podcast host, leaned slightly forward. In 20 years interviewing professional athletes, he had developed an almost supernatural instinct for recognizing when someone was about to share something monumental, something that would forever change how people see a public figure. The soft light entering through the studio windows in Oakland created shadows that seemed to dance with the emotional tension that dominated the environment. James Wilson, the experienced producer, adjusted his headphones and made a silent gesture to his technical team. His professional instincts were screaming that something historic was about to happen. "You all know Steph," Draymond continued, his voice becoming lower, more intimate, as if he were sharing a secret with his closest friends instead of speaking to millions of listeners. "You see the smile, the impossible shots, the unshakable confidence. You see the guy who changed basketball forever, who made the impossible seem routine. You can perceive that great truths require courage to be told, and Draymond was gathering that courage with every deep breath he took. The studio seemed to be shrinking around his presence, not because of his imposing physique, but because of the emotional magnitude of what he was preparing to reveal. Anthony Zhang, the sound engineer with 15 years of experience, checked his equipment for the third time. There was something in Draymond's voice, a raw vulnerability that made everyone in the studio unconsciously lean closer, as if they were drawn by a magnetic force toward the truth that was about to be revealed. "But I need to tell you about the Steph that nobody knows," Draymond said, his eyes becoming distant as if he were being transported back to moments he had promised never to reveal. "The Steph who would call me at 2 a.m. crying. The Steph who doubted himself more than any of you would ever imagine." The mention of these nocturnal calls seemed to fundamentally alter the studio's atmosphere. Tyler Brooks, the young production assistant, felt chills running up his arms. There was something in the way Draymond had changed the tone of his voice that suggested they were about to hear something that would forever change how the world sees Steph Curry. "We're talking about the guy everyone considers the most confident shooter in history," Draymond continued, a small, bitter laugh escaping his lips. "But I'm going to tell you about the nights when he questioned absolutely everything about himself, about his worth, about whether he deserved to be where he is." How many times in life do we discover that the people we most admire face internal battles we never imagined? Draymond paused, allowing the weight of that question to settle over everyone listening like a heavy blanket made of realization and empathy. Connor Smith, a sports journalist watching the live broadcast from his apartment in San Francisco, paused everything he was doing. Something in Draymond's tone Something in the way he was carefully choosing each word made him understand that this wasn't just another podcast interview. This was going to be something that would reverberate far beyond the world of sports. "I remember the first time Steph called me crying," Draymond said, his voice barely above a whisper. Now, creating an intimacy that made each listener feel as if they were overhearing a private conversation between best friends. "It was during our first playoff season together. Everyone thought he was on top of the world, but I answered the phone and heard the most broken guy I had ever heard in my life." The silence that followed was different from any other silence in that studio. It was the kind of silence that precedes life-changing revelations, the kind that makes you hold your breath because you feel that the next word spoken will matter for a very, very long time. Diana Thompson, a veteran ESPN producer watching from home, felt tears forming in her eyes before even knowing completely what Draymond was about to reveal. There was something in the pure vulnerability in his voice that touched something universal about friendship, about carrying the secret burdens of someone you love. "I always knew the day would come when I would have to break my silence," Draymond continued, looking directly at the camera as if he were speaking personally to each person who would eventually watch this interview. "Because the world deserves to know that Steph Curry isn't just a great basketball player. He's a human being who faced demons you can't even imagine, and who found a way to transform his pain into something that inspires millions of people." Kevin O'Connor, the veteran audio technician, made subtle adjustments to capture every nuance of Draymond's emotional delivery. He understood that these weren't just words being recorded for a podcast. They were becoming part of something that would forever change how people think about vulnerability, about strength, about what it really means to be human under public spotlights. "You see Steph make those 12-meter shots and think he never doubted anything," Draymond said, his voice gaining intensity while remaining incredibly gentle. "But I was there on the nights when he questioned whether he deserved to be on the same court as his teammates. I was there when he thought he was fooling everyone and would soon be discovered as a fraud." The collective breathing of everyone in the studio seemed to have stopped. It was as if time itself was moving in slow motion, each second stretching like warm honey being poured, creating a moment of connection that would be felt by anyone listening. Marcus Williams, a former NBA player watching from his office in Los Angeles, felt his heart accelerate. He recognized this vulnerability, this secret doubt that many elite athletes carry but never admit publicly. Draymond's courage in exposing this was touching something deeply personal in anyone who had ever doubted their own worth. "I'm going to tell you about the call that changed everything," Draymond said, his voice now carrying the weight of a confession that had been years in the making. "The night Steph told me he was thinking about giving up everything. Not just basketball. Everything. Public life. Pressure. Spotlights. Everything." The emotional impact of these words hit everyone in the studio like a physical wave. Steven Rodriguez, the camera director, felt his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the focus. In 2 decades filming professional athletes, he had never captured someone being so vulnerable, so honest about the internal struggles of a superstar. "And this was after he had won his first championship," Draymond continued, letting the irony of this information settle like molten lead in the stomach of everyone listening. "Everyone thought he was living his dream. But I knew the truth. I knew what was happening behind that smile you see on television. How is it possible that someone could be at their greatest public triumph and still be fighting such deep demons in private?" This question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to burn, carrying with it the acrid aroma of realization that appearances can be deeply deceiving. "I've been carrying these secrets for years," Draymond admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I promised Steph that I would never tell anyone about these conversations, about these moments of weakness he shared with me. But there came a point when I realized that keeping this silence was doing more harm than good." The camera captured the exact moment when Draymond's eyes began to shine with unshed tears, creating an image that no one in that studio, and, soon, no one watching at home, would ever be able to forget. It was the sight of one of the toughest players in the NBA being moved to tears by the memory of his best friend's pain. Daniel Patel, a sports psychologist watching from New York, stopped everything he was doing. There was something in Draymond's brutal honesty that was touching something universal about male friendship, about carrying someone's secrets, about the emotional cost of being the confidant of someone the world sees as invincible. "Do you want to know why I finally decided to speak?" Draymond asked, looking directly at the camera with an intensity that seemed to reach through the screen and grab each viewer by the heart. "Because I realized that keeping Steph's secrets wasn't protecting him. It was protecting the illusion everyone has about him. And that illusion is hurting people." The studio had transformed into something that transcended sports media. It had become a modern confessional, where truths about human vulnerability, about the cost of fame, about the weight of being seen as perfect, were being revealed with a courage that left everyone breathless. Because there are millions of people out there who feel like failures because they compare themselves to the public version of Steph Curry. Draymond continued, his voice gaining strength even while remaining charged with emotion. "They don't know that even the guy they see as the definition of confidence has called someone at 3 in the morning, questioning whether he was worth anything." What exactly was Draymond about to reveal about these nocturnal calls? What secrets had Steph shared that were so deep, so personal, that they had remained buried for years? And why had Draymond chosen this moment, this platform, to finally break his silence about the most vulnerable side of one of sport's most admired figures? Great truths require courage to be told, and sometimes they require even more courage to be heard, especially when they force us to confront our own assumptions about strength, success, and what it really means to be human under impossible pressure. Draymond Green took a deep breath, and you could feel that years of carefully maintained silence were about to break like a dam that finally gives way under the pressure of decades of dammed waters. The sound of his controlled breathing filled the studio like wind before a storm that will forever change the landscape of everything it touches. The first call happened in 2015, Draymond began, his voice carrying the weight of a memory that had been polished by time but never lost its sharp pain. "It was 2:43 in the morning. I know because I looked at the clock when the phone rang, thinking who the hell was calling me at this hour." Robert Kim, the veteran host, felt his pulse accelerate. In 20 years conducting interviews, he had developed an almost supernatural instinct for recognizing when someone was about to share something that would forever change how the world sees a public figure. The soft lighting of the studio seemed to have gained a more intense, more focused quality, as if the universe itself was leaning in to hear words that would soon echo through screens and speakers to touch hearts across the country and around the world. "I answered the phone," Draymond continued, "and on the other side was Steph. But it wasn't the Steph the world knows. It wasn't the confident guy who makes impossible shots look easy. It was someone completely broken, sobbing in a way that made me realize I was hearing a part of him that maybe no one else had ever witnessed. You can feel that life's truest moments often happen in the darkness of dawn, when defenses are down and vulnerability becomes impossible to hide. James Wilson, the producer, made silent adjustments to his equipment, knowing instinctively that he was documenting something that would be remembered and quoted for decades. Steph told me something on that first call that completely shocked me, Draymond said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper that somehow carried more power than any shout ever could. He said, "Dre, I don't deserve to be here. Everyone is going to find out that I'm a fraud and that I fooled everyone to get where I am." The silence that followed these words was deafening. How is it possible that someone at the peak of their professional career, someone who had just won an NBA championship, could feel like a fraud? Anthony Zhang, the sound engineer, checked his levels for the fourth time, understanding that every nuance of this revelation needed to be captured with crystal perfection. "I sat in my bed that night," Draymond continued, "listening to one of the greatest basketball players in history tell me he felt like he was living a lie. He told me about how he stayed awake every night, reliving every mistake he made, every shot he missed, every play that didn't work." Tyler Brooks, the young production assistant, felt tears forming in his eyes. There was something in the brutal honesty of Draymond's confession that touched something universal about insecurity, about imposter syndrome, about how even the most successful people can feel like they're fooling everyone. "You know what broke my heart most about that call?" Draymond asked, looking directly at the camera as if he were sharing a secret with each person who would eventually watch. "Steph told me he was afraid to wake up and discover that everything had been a dream. That he was, back in high school, being rejected by coaches who said he was too small to play professional basketball." Connor Smith, watching from his apartment in San Francisco, had to pause the broadcast to process what he was hearing. The image of Steph Curry, the man who had revolutionized basketball, who made 12-meter shots seem routine, terrified that his success was temporary and undeserved, was almost impossible to reconcile with the public persona everyone knew. But that first call was just the beginning, Draymond continued, his voice gaining the texture of someone preparing to reveal something even deeper. "For the next 3 years, Steph would call me at least once a week, at 2 or 3 in the morning. Whenever the pressure became too intense, whenever he felt he was disappointing people, whenever the weight of being Steph Curry became too heavy to carry alone. How is it possible that someone who brought so much joy to millions of fans was suffering in silence this way?" Diana Thompson, the veteran ESPN producer, felt her heart breaking as she imagined all those lonely nights when the man the world saw as the embodiment of confidence was fighting demons no one knew existed. "I became the repository of all his fears," Draymond admitted, "of all the insecurities he couldn't show to anyone else. He would tell me about how he had nightmares about failing in crucial moments, about disappointing his family, about not living up to the expectations everyone had of him." The studio had transformed into a sacred space where secrets kept for years were finally being released like birds that had been trapped in cages for too long. Kevin O'Connor, the audio technician, worked with the reverence of someone who understood he was capturing confessions that would forever change how people think about vulnerability and strength. "One specific night I'll never forget," Draymond said, his voice trembling slightly with the emotion of the memory. "Steph called me after a game where he had scored 42 points. Everyone was celebrating, calling it one of the best performances of the season. But he was crying on the phone. Great truths require courage to be told, and Draymond's courage in revealing these intimate moments was creating a new understanding of what it really means to carry the weight of public expectations. Marcus Williams, the former NBA player, recognized this pain in his own experience, this dissonance between external success and internal turbulence. Steph told me that night, Draymond continued, that he felt like he was living someone else's life, that everyone saw Steph Curry, but he felt like that little kid from Charlotte that everyone said would never be good enough to play in the NBA. He said he was afraid that one day everyone would discover that the high school coaches were right. Steven Rodriguez, the camera director, adjusted his focus to capture every micro-expression on Draymond's face. In 2 decades documenting professional athletes, he had never witnessed someone expose the internal struggles of a global superstar with such honesty. "Do you want to know what moment scared me the most?" Draymond asked, his voice now carrying an urgency that made everyone in the studio lean even closer. "It was when Steph told me that sometimes he thought it would be better if he had never become famous, that he envied normal people who could fail without the whole world knowing about it." Daniel Patel, the sports psychologist watching from New York, immediately recognized the classic signs of someone struggling with severe anxiety and imposter syndrome. Draymond's courage in sharing these details was creating a unique opportunity for discussions about mental health in professional sports. "I began to understand," Draymond said, "that the smile you see Steph give in interviews, the confidence he demonstrates on the court, all of that was partly a performance. Not false, but necessary." He told me once that he woke up every morning and consciously decided to be Steph Curry for the world, even when he didn't feel like Steph Curry inside. The revelation that Steph's apparently natural confidence was partially a conscious construction hit everyone in the studio like an emotional wave. How many people would recognize themselves in this description? How many people understand the daily effort required to maintain a public persona that hides internal struggles? But the call that changed everything, Draymond said, clearly preparing for the most significant revelation, happened in 2017, after we lost in the finals. "Steph called me that night and said something that made me realize I wasn't just being a friend. I was possibly saving someone's life." The weight of this statement settled over the studio like a heavy blanket. What exactly had Steph said in that call that made Draymond realize the real gravity of the situation? What words had been shared in the darkness of defeat that revealed how deeply Steph was fighting his own demons? "Steph told me," Draymond continued, his voice breaking, "that he didn't know if he could continue living under that pressure, that he was tired of carrying the expectations of millions of people, and that sometimes he thought everyone would be better off without him." The silence that followed was different from any other. It was the silence that comes when you realize that someone you admire has been fighting battles you never imagined, that behind success and fame there was a real person facing real pain that could have devastating consequences. Great truths require courage to be told, but sometimes they require even more courage to be carried in silence for years, until the moment comes when silence becomes more harmful than truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. The weight of Draymond's revelations had transformed the studio into something that transcended a simple podcast interview. It had become IDT, Modern Confessional, where years of silent pain were finally finding voice. You could feel that every word he had shared so far was building toward something even deeper, something that would explain why he had carried these secrets for so long and why now he felt he had to break them. After that call in 2017, Draymond began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had carried another person's emotional burden for years. I realized I was no longer just being a friend to Steph. I had become his anchor to reality, the only person to whom he could admit that the pressure of being perfect was literally destroying him from the inside. Robert Kim, the host, felt a deep responsibility settle over his shoulders. He understood he was facilitating not just a revelation about a celebrity, but a crucial discussion about mental health, about the human cost of fame, about how society treats its idols as if they were invulnerable when in reality they are deeply human. The quiet, soft lighting of the studio seemed to pulse with the emotional energy Draymond was releasing, each shadow and each reflection creating an atmosphere that honored the gravity of what was being shared. James Wilson, the producer, worked with the silent consciousness of someone who knew he was documenting a moment that would change conversations about male vulnerability and public pressure forever. "You need to understand," Draymond continued, "that Steph never talked about these struggles with anyone else. Not with his family, not with therapists, not with other teammates. He chose me as his confidant because he knew I understood the pressure of being judged in every game, of having millions of people expecting perfection from you. You can perceive that sometimes the deepest relationships are formed not through shared happy moments, but through the courage of one person to show their deepest wounds to someone they trust completely." Anthony Jang, the sound engineer, made microscopic adjustments to his equipment, understanding he was capturing confessions that require the rarest courage, the courage to be vulnerable. "I began to see patterns," Draymond said, his voice gaining the quality of someone analyzing years of careful observations. "Steph would always call me after games where he had exceptional performances, never after bad games, on those he could cope because they confirmed his worst suspicions about himself. But after big games, when everyone was praising him, that's when anxiety hit its peak." Tyler Brooks, the young assistant, felt a visceral connection to this description. How many people experience anxiety not during failure, but during success, when they feel like they're living above their merits? The universality of this experience made Draymond's revelations resonate far beyond the world of sports. "Steph explained to me once," Draymond continued, "that when he played poorly, it made sense to him. It confirmed what he secretly believed about himself. But when he played exceptionally well, it created terrible cognitive dissonance. He felt like he was fooling everyone, like it was just a matter of time until his true ability was revealed." Connor Smith, watching from San Francisco, had to pause again to process the psychological complexity of what was being revealed. The idea that someone like Steph Curry could feel more anguish during his moments of triumph than during his defeats was deeply counterintuitive, but made devastating sense when explained this way. "But what really broke my heart," Draymond said, tears now flowing openly down his face, "was when I began to realize the sacrifices Steph was making to maintain this facade of perfection. He told me about how he would cancel plans with family when he felt too anxious, how he would pretend to be sick instead of admitting he was struggling mentally. The studio had become a space where truths about the human cost of fame were being exposed with brutal honesty that left everyone breathless." Diana Thompson, watching from home, thought about all the times she had seen Steph Curry in interviews, smiling and seeming completely at ease, never imagining the internal battle happening behind that carefully maintained facade. "Steph told me once that he had two lives," Draymond revealed, "the public life of the Steph Curry everyone knows, and the private life of the Steph who called me at 3 in the morning questioning his worth as a human being. He said sometimes he forgot which of the two was real. How is it possible for someone to become so dissociated from their own identity?" Kevin O'Connor, the audio technician, worked with growing reverence, understanding he was capturing confessions that would shed light on aspects of human experience rarely discussed publicly, especially in the context of male public figures. The part that haunted me most, Draymond continued, was that Steph became so good at hiding his pain that even the people closest to him didn't know what was happening. He told me he developed elaborate strategies to appear well when he wasn't well. He would rehearse smiles in the mirror, practice answers for interviews that would sound confident even when he felt destroyed. Marcus Williams, the former NBA player, recognized aspects of his own experience in this description. The pressure to maintain a public image while struggling with personal issues was something many professional athletes faced, but it was rarely discussed with such honesty. But the revelation that changed everything for me, Draymond said, clearly preparing for the most significant confession, was when Steph told me about the thoughts he had during games. Thoughts that made me realize how deeply he was suffering. Steven Rodriguez, the camera director, adjusted his framing to capture the complete intensity of the moment. In 2 decades filming athletes, he had never documented someone revealing such intimate aspects of a superstar's internal struggle. Steph told me, Draymond continued, his voice trembling with emotion, that during games, especially in crucial moments, he sometimes had thoughts about failing on purpose, not because he wanted to lose, but because he thought it would confirm what he really deserved and relieve the pressure of having to continue being perfect. Daniel Patel, the sports psychologist, immediately recognized the signs of someone struggling with deep self-sabotaging thoughts. Draymond's courage in revealing these details was creating a crucial opportunity for discussions about mental health in elite sports. "Do you understand what this means?" Draymond asked, looking directly at the camera. The man who made some of the most clutch shots in basketball history was simultaneously fighting a part of himself that wanted to fail to escape the pressure of having to continue being extraordinary. The psychological complexity of this revelation hit everyone in the studio, like a wave. The idea that someone could simultaneously be a fierce competitor and someone struggling against self-sabotaging impulses created a new understanding of the complex nature of excellence under extreme pressure. "I carried these secrets for years," Draymond admitted, "because I promised Steph I would never tell anyone. But I began to realize that keeping his silence was perpetuating a bigger problem. It was allowing millions of people to continue seeing him as some kind of perfect machine instead of a human being struggling with real issues." The weight of this responsibility, carrying someone's deepest secrets while watching the world worship an idealized version of that person, was something few could fully understand. But Draymond's decision to finally break this silence was creating an opportunity for more honest conversations about vulnerability, about the cost of fame, about what it really means to be strong. "But the reason I finally decided to speak," Draymond said, preparing for the final revelation that would explain why he had chosen this moment to break years of silence, "was because of something Steph told me the last time we talked about these issues. Something that made me realize that keeping these secrets was no longer protecting him. It was possibly hurting other people who needed to hear his story." What exactly had Steph said that had changed Draymond's perspective on keeping these secrets? What words had been shared that transformed years of silent loyalty into a need to reveal the truth for the greater good? Great truths require courage to be told, but sometimes they require even more courage to be released, especially when you realize that keeping secrets to protect one person might be inadvertently hurting millions of other people who need to know that even their heroes struggle with doubts, fears, and the crushing pressure of trying to be perfect in an imperfect world. The moment had arrived when Draymond Green needed to explain why, after years of keeping Steph Curry's deepest secrets, he had finally decided to break his silence. You could feel that everything revealed so far had been building to this final explanation. The reason why a man who had promised to keep secrets had chosen to reveal truths that would forever change how the world saw one of sport's most admired figures. The last conversation I had with Steph about these issues, Draymond began, his voice carrying the weight of a memory that had clearly haunted him for months, was 6 months ago. He called me, but this time he wasn't crying. This time he was different, more centered, more at peace with himself. And he told me something that completely changed my perspective on keeping these secrets. Robert Kim, the host, leaned forward with the awareness of someone about to witness the conclusion of one of the deepest confessions he had ever facilitated. The transformation that had happened in the studio over the past 2 hours was palpable. They had started with an interview about basketball and had arrived at something much deeper about the human condition. The light entering through the windows had changed with the passage of time, creating a golden atmosphere that seemed to sanctify the final words about to be shared. James Wilson, the producer, worked with the silent reverence of someone who understood he was documenting not just the end of an interview, but the conclusion of an emotional journey that had lasted years. Steph told me, Draymond continued, that he had finally started therapy. Not because he was feeling worse, but because he was feeling better and wanted to understand why. He wanted to process all these years of internal struggle with someone who could help him make sense of everything. You can perceive that sometimes the greatest transformations begin not when we're at our worst moment, but when we begin to glimpse the possibility of healing and want to understand how we got there. Anthony Jung, the sound engineer, continued his meticulous work, knowing that every word of this conclusion would be analyzed and remembered by people fighting their own internal battles. But what he told me next, Draymond continued, was what changed everything for me. Steph said, "Dre, my therapist helped me realize something. Keeping these secrets, hiding these struggles, wasn't just hurting me. It was potentially hurting all the young people who see me as an example and think they have to be perfect too." Tyler Brooks, the young assistant, felt this statement hit something deep in his own heart. How many young athletes, how many students, how many people in general compared themselves to public figures who seemed flawless and felt inadequate because of their own struggles and imperfections? Steph looked at me through the FaceTime screen, Draymond remembered, and said something I'll never forget. He said, "I realized that by keeping my vulnerability secret, I was perpetuating the idea that strength means not having problems. But true strength is having problems and finding healthy ways to deal with them." Connor Smith, watching from San Francisco, felt tears forming in his eyes. Steph Curry's evolution from someone hiding his pain to someone wanting to use his experience to help others was a transformation that resonated far beyond the world of sports, touching something universal about personal growth and social responsibility. That's when Steph gave me permission, Draymond revealed, to share our story if I felt it could help other people. He said, "If our story can help one person realize it's okay not to be okay, then it's worth any embarrassment I might feel." The studio had become a sacred space, where years of pain had been transformed into possibility of healing for countless other people. Diana Thompson, watching from home, understood she was witnessing not just a revelation about a celebrity, but a moment that could change conversations about mental health for an entire generation. "But I still hesitated for months," Draymond admitted. Even with his permission, I struggled with the decision to break years of silence. It was like I was betraying the trust he had placed in me during his most vulnerable moments. How is it possible to navigate between personal loyalty and public responsibility? Kevin O'Connor, the audio technician, worked with the consciousness of someone capturing a meditation on one of modern life's most complex ethical questions. When does the greater good justify revealing personal secrets, even with permission? What finally convinced me to speak, Draymond said, was a message I received from a 17-year-old boy on Instagram. He wrote to me saying he was thinking about giving up basketball because he felt like a failure compared to Steph Curry. He said he thought he would never be good enough because he would never be as confident as Steph seemed to be. Marcus Williams, the former NBA player, recognized this pressure, the impossibility of competing not just with someone's skill, but with the apparent emotional perfection they projected. Draymond's decision to reveal the humanity behind the icon was creating space for more honest conversations about the struggles everyone faces. It was at that moment, Draymond continued, that I realized keeping Steph's secrets was no longer protecting him. It was inadvertently hurting people like that 17-year-old boy who needed to know that even their heroes struggle with doubts and insecurities. Steven Rodriguez, the camera director, captured the growing determination in Draymond's face as he explained his final motivation. In 2 decades documenting athletes, he had never filmed someone articulating so clearly the tension between personal loyalty and social responsibility. I called Steph that night, Draymond said, and told him about the boy's message. And you know what he told me? He said, "Dre, if our story can prevent one person from feeling alone in their struggles, then we have an obligation to share it." Daniel Patel, the sports psychologist, recognized the profound wisdom in this decision. The transformation of personal pain into public purpose was one of the most powerful forms of healing, both for those who share and those who receive the story. And then Steph told me something that sealed my decision, Draymond revealed, preparing for the final words that would completely explain his motivation. He said, "The Steph Curry the world sees is only half the story. If people only know the half that seems perfect, then I'm failing to be a complete example of what it means to be human." The depth of this statement settled over everyone in the studio like a blessing. The understanding that true heroism doesn't come from appearing perfect, but from navigating imperfections with courage and seeking help when needed, was a lesson that transcended sports and touched the universal human experience. Do you want to know why I chose this moment, this platform? Draymond asked, looking directly at the camera. Because Steph is in a better place now. He did the therapy work. He developed healthy coping strategies. He learned to separate Steph Curry, the player, from Steph Curry, the human being. The complete transformation of the narrative, from secrets kept for protection to truths shared for purpose, created a new understanding of how public figures can use their influence to promote important conversations about mental health. And more importantly, Draymond continued, he wants his story to inspire other people to seek help when they need it. He wants young athletes to know it's okay not to be okay, that seeking therapy is a sign of strength, not weakness. The studio had become a space of transformation where years of pain had been alchemized into hope. Everyone present understood they had witnessed something that would change conversations about male vulnerability, about mental health in sports, about what it really means to be strong. The message Steph wants me to share, Draymond said, preparing for his final words, is that behind every person you admire, there's a complete human story. There are triumphs and struggles, confidence and doubts, moments of strength and moments of weakness. The camera captured Draymond wiping tears from his eyes as he concluded his historic confession. Steph Curry isn't less inspiring because he struggled with anxiety and doubts. He's more inspiring because, despite these struggles, he found ways to be extraordinary. And now he wants to help other people do the same. The silence that followed was deep and respectful, full of recognition that everyone had witnessed something that transcended entertainment or sports. They had participated in a conversation that could save lives, that could inspire people to seek help, that could change how society thinks about strength and vulnerability. That's the complete truth about Steph Curry, Draymond concluded. He's not perfect. He's something better than perfect. He's real. And sometimes being real is the most courageous thing you can be. Great truths require courage to be told. But the most powerful truths of all are those that transform pain into purpose, secrets into healing, and vulnerability into a strength that can illuminate the path for others struggling in the shadows, showing them they're not alone, and that it's okay to ask for help when the journey becomes too heavy to carry alone.